Hey, Kristy, Wallace, you're a financial grown-up. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Bobby. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are the CEO of Ellevate Network, one of my favorite women's organizations. In fact, my very first time recording a podcast was on your podcast, which I'm also a huge fan of.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. And I remember when you were in our offices way back when, sharing everything about your book and your money tips, and it's still one of the best podcasts to this day. Money is always important, and I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I was so nervous. That seems like forever ago. For your money story, we're going to go back to your much younger years when you were a teenager, and you and your sister were the youngest waitresses on a team. You got a lot of advice from the more experienced waitresses. Tell us your money story.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I grew up in this tiny town in New Jersey called Sea Isle City, and my sister and I worked at this Italian restaurant, Bono's. And we were teenagers when we did this. We worked there for years, every summer, but all of the other waitresses were older. They were oftentimes already in college, or many of them were teachers, and this was their summer job when school was out. And they really helped instill in us values and perspective when it came to the work we were doing. Waitressing is so interesting because you get tips, you walk out of the door with cash every night, and you can easily, especially if you're a young teenager, want to go spend that money. But we saw from the teachers how much they saved that money. They worked really hard to get the tips, to keep track of that money, and then saved it because that was what was helping to pay their bills and helping them during the school year. So it really gave us this perspective of not just the value of money, but how important it is to save it and to respect it and to think more long-term, particularly in a cash-based business like that.
Yeah, it is interesting because there was cash in hand. Were you tempted when you first started waitressing to just go out and spend the money?
Of course. And especially, I think we had new, driving cars. And so we wanted to go to the mall and buy things and just, always going to Wallace, which was this convenience store there, and buying drinks and sandwiches. I mean, it's so easy to just throw money away. And the advice that these other waitresses gave us around, saving that money and using it, more meaningfully, it really stood out. It stood out to me, and it continues to stand out to me today. Because I think oftentimes it's, particularly now with credit cards, and you just put your card down and buy, and then suddenly you get the bill and it's, wide eyes, sticker shock. So I'm very thankful to them for that advice.
How did the conversations start? I mean, you guys were the new kids there. Did they just see what was going on, that you were spending your money? What happened?
I think the conversation started earlier in the season when things were a little bit slower, and they would be talking about, how much money did you make last night or tonight? Things are a bit slow. Here's how much I'm hoping to make this summer. This is why it's important to make X amount of dollars this summer, and how it helps with rent or helps pay my bills during these months and into the winter. So they were just with each other very honest and transparent about their expectations for how much money they wanted to make or needed to make, how they were going to use it and spend it. And were very inclusive of my sister and I in those conversations. So clearly we didn't, we were still living at home, we were younger, we didn't have that perspective. And we, I'm sure, would say, some flippant comments like, oh, we just go out and buy a bunch of stuff. It's great. We have cash. And so they definitely sat us down and said, listen, waitressing is a great job, but you end up with a lot of cash, and it can be easy to not keep track of how much you're making and to put it in the bank and to manage it wisely. And, just for now, and especially when you're going to college in a few years and you're older, it's really important that you understand how you spend your money and you spend it wisely.
And also, it's interesting that they talked about the seasonality of it, that there's more money coming in at certain times. And just because you're making a certain amount one month, the next month might be very different.
And that's so true. And there's the aspect of perspective there. So Katie and I were younger. Our expenses weren't so critical to our well-being at that time. We were very fortunate. We certainly worked as soon as we could start working, and all throughout our teen and years I've always worked. But I think living at home and not still having some of the support of family makes it less critical. But here you're talking about adults who are budgeting, they're planning, they're thinking about, how much does my teacher's salary extend? What do I need to make in the summer? Am I going to make it here? If I'm not going to make it here, then how do I find a different job, or how do I supplement that income? Every day mattered to them in terms of understanding how much they were bringing in and how much that covered their costs and what they needed. So that perspective for us was a really important one, because especially a few years later when I was going to college and using the money I made in the summer to pay for my bills and expenses once I was in school, I came out of the gate just, with all the insights I needed to be successful in that budgeting and in that planning.
So what is the lesson for our listeners from that story?
Be mindful of how you spend your money. Really want to understand ways you can save, how you spend the money, but then also the impact you personally can have on driving that income, right? And when I was waitressing, something that I learned from the other waitresses was tips are relational to service. So if you have good service and you work hard to be the best at your job, then you get some money, or take the extra shifts. There were a number of summers, particularly once I was in college, that I didn't take a single day off the entire summer. I worked every day, and I loved it because that meant I was making money, and I had my little book where I was keeping track of how much I was making and how much I wanted to make. So the lesson is just put in 110%, understand how your work relates to the money that you're making, particularly as you get into the workforce and into a corporate environment, really looking at the work that you do, how that ties to the business and the business success, and using that as a motivator for you to do great work, but then also make that extra money and ask for it.
Speaking of extra money, you have extra money because of the everyday money tip that you're going to share. And it came to you when you started realizing, as so many of us do, everyone can relate to this, spending way too much money on food out of the house, just going through life. Tell us your everyday money tip.
Oh, I love this story because it was just this aha moment for me that I feel came way too late in my life. I have 3 kids at home. They're little kids, and every month week, the grocery bills were astronomical. And at the same time, I was finding that I was spending a lot of cash every week. And I couldn't quite understand why. So I spent a lot of time. I looked at all my budgets, my numbers, and where I was spending money and how I was spending it. I love Excel spreadsheets, so I categorized everything and realized I was spending not just a lot of money at the grocery store, but a lot of money eating out just during the week, getting coffee, grabbing breakfast, lunch. It could easily add up to $20, $30 a day. And when you think about that over 5 days a week, plus the grocery bills, it really adds up. So I stopped doing that. I stopped eating out. I would bring my breakfast and lunch. My husband and I would make, these little egg muffins. You make eggs in a muffin tin, so they're easy to just grab and go. We would make coffee at home. Pound of coffee is $12 versus a $4 cup of coffee when you're out. I love making soups and stews. They're relatively inexpensive to make, and they freeze, and they last a long time. So I'd make a big pot every weekend of something, and just found it to be not only easy, but financially healthy, and healthy for me in terms of the food I was eating. So it's been a great lesson learned for me, and one that I really enjoy every day when I have my lunch.
Yeah, and I think the everyday money tip there is, actually look at the numbers, because this is not something new. It's not something that we haven't all thought of. We all know that we shouldn't be spending so much money out, but it takes a lot to actually sit down and say, wait, look at what I'm actually spending, to actually add up the receipts, especially when your grocery bill was high as well. So you might have thought, well, I don't want to spend more money on groceries. And if you eat at home, in theory, you'd be spending more on groceries. So it's all going to work out. Not so much. I think you have a great example, and making things like soups and stews in batches. I think that's a key thing, that you have it ready in advance. It's something that I need to work on more, is to actually plan in advance what you're going to be bringing with you when you go out, so you're not left scrounging for coffee because you didn't have the coffee machine set the night before. And also maybe have a coffee cup that's portable that you can bring with you, because if you don't have somebody to bring the coffee with you and it's time to go, you're kind of stuck and you're going to buy that coffee on the run.
Yeah. And even the making food, it goes beyond being at work every day. It's when you get home at night. And, as I said, I have 3 little kids. I work full time. My husband is working. So when we get home, it's always, who's going to make dinner? But having food ready to go has been great for us there as well. We'll make, big batches of multiple things, roast some fish or grill some food, steam a bunch of veggies, so that when we get home at night, there's always food that we can easily grab and put on the table. And that's kept us from ordering out so much. We got to a point where ordering out food when we just didn't feel like cooking, and realizing we weren't even satisfied by it. You weren't even craving that food. You just needed to get something on the table. So it's plan ahead, be creative. There's lots of great sites and recipes out there.
What's your favorite site?
I like all recipes, actually, because it's crowdsourced, and so there's kind of some fun things, and the comments are really interesting. Food 52 is always great. There's some great bloggers out there. We will sometimes try to eat paleo or maybe Whole30. So some really great sites out there with some good modifications to recipes that are really healthy and delicious.
Love that. Tell us more about what's going on at Ellevate Network these days, and where people can learn more about Ellevate and about you.
Absolutely. So Ellevate is a global community of women at work. We're doing some great things. We have our Mobilize Women Summit coming up in June, which we're very excited about. We also are launching our online peer networking circles called Squads in January. So it's groups of 6 to 8 women who meet for half an hour a week via video chat over 3 months. And it's proven to be hugely successful in giving women more confidence and creativity in their careers. So if you want to learn more, check us out at ellevatenetwork.com. That's 2 L's, ELLEVATE network.com.
And what are your social handles?
We are at Ellevate_NTWK, Ellevate Network, on Instagram and Facebook, and it's Ellevate NTWK on Twitter.
And don't forget your podcast.
Yes, and our podcast, Ellevate Conversations with Women Changing the Face of Business,
which you are the host of, and we love. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bobby. This was great.